I woke pressed against something solid and warm. My cheek rested on fabric that smelled of cedarwood and something darker, gunpowder, maybe, or the metallic tang of a storm about to break. The train swayed beneath me, that familiar lurch and roll I'd learned to feel through my bones since sound meant nothing to me. And when I finally opened my eyes, I realized with horror that I had fallen asleep on a stranger. Not just any stranger. The man whose shoulder I'd been using as a pillow wore a military uniform so heavy with medals and insignia that even I, deaf since birth, isolated from most of the world, trained to avoid looking directly at people who radiated danger, recognized what he was. Alpha. Warlord. Power wrapped in fabric and pinned with gold. His hand rested on my shoulder with a grip that was gentle but utterly immovable. And his eyes, the color of iron, of winter seas, of every storm I'd ever watched through window glass, were fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath catch somewhere in my throat. I tried to pull away. Tried to apologize in the only way I knew how, through frantic sign language and mortified gestures that probably looked like a bird having a seizure. But his grip tightened, just slightly, keeping me exactly where I was. And then he did something that stopped my heart completely. He signed back. You needed rest. Don't apologize. His hands moved with the fluid precision of someone who had learned the language properly, not the awkward fumbling of someone who'd picked up a few phrases to be polite. This was fluency. This was familiarity. This was someone who had spoken with her hands long enough that the gestures came as naturally as breathing. I stared at him, my mind struggling to catch up with the impossibility of what I was seeing. A decorated military officer, an alpha who carried himself like he commanded armies, knew sign language. On a random commuter train. At 6 in the morning. I was 22 years old. I had been deaf my entire life. And in all those years, not a single hearing person had ever learned to speak my language unless they had to, unless they were paid to, or related to me, or trapped in a situation where no other option existed. This man had chosen to learn. I could see it in the ease of his movements, the way his signs carried no hesitation. Are you deaf? He asked, though I suspected he already knew the answer. I nodded slowly, my fingers trembling as I signed back. Since birth. His expression didn't change, still that calm, watchful intensity, but something softened in his iron-gray eyes. He glanced around the train car, taking in the other passengers who were pointedly not looking at us, then returned his attention to me. I'm Silas Vane. What's your name? My hands moved automatically, muscle memory taking over, while my brain was still trying to process the fact that an alpha warlord was having a casual conversation with me in sign language on the morning train. Leo? My name is Leo. Leo, he repeated, and the way his hands shaped my name, careful, deliberate, as if it mattered, made something warm and entirely unwelcome unfurl in my chest. He glanced out the window, then back at me. Where were you going? I looked past him at the landscape rushing by outside, and felt my stomach drop into my shoes. This wasn't the familiar countryside between Crest Hill and Oak Haven, the route I'd memorized over 2 years of daily commutes, the landmarks I used to tell myself when my stop was coming, because I couldn't hear the announcements. This was flat land. Industrial buildings. Train yards that stretched on forever, filled with military vehicles and cargo containers stamped with insignia I didn't recognize. I had no idea where I was. Oak Haven, I signed, panic rising sharp and sour in my throat. I work at a bookstore in Oak Haven. What time is it? Where are we? Silas pulled out a pocket watch, old-fashioned military issue, and held it up for me to see. 7:45. My stop had been at 6:40. I had slept through it. Slept through Oak Haven and whatever towns came after. Slept through an hour of travel I didn't remember. Slept through the transformation of the familiar countryside into something alien and industrial. We're approaching the northern Garrison, Silas signed, his expression impossibly calm, as if this was a normal situation and not the beginning of my complete unraveling. You've come about 200 kilometers past your stop. The return train doesn't run until this evening. 200 kilometers. The number hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't afford the fare back. couldn't afford to miss a full day of work. Marcus, the bookstore owner, was kind. He'd hired me when no one else would, had learned a few basic signs so we could communicate, but he wasn't patient with unreliability. And showing up tomorrow with an excuse about falling asleep on the wrong train would sound like exactly that, an excuse. Allah. Proof that I wasn't responsible enough to keep the job I desperately needed to pay rent and buy food and survive in a world that had never made space for people like me. I must have looked as panicked as I felt, because Silas's hand moved from my shoulder to my wrist. His fingers wrapped around it gently, grounding me. His thumb pressed against my pulse point, and I realized with a jolt that he could feel my heartbeat racing, could probably smell my fear too, that sharp chemical edge that omegas gave off when they were scared. I'd spent years learning to suppress my scent, to minimize it, to make myself as small and unnoticeable as possible. Alphas noticing me was dangerous. Alphas with power and authority, and those iron-gray eyes that saw too much, they were the most dangerous of all. But something about the way Silas held my wrist, firm but not painful, steady without being controlling, kept me from pulling away. He waited until I looked at him again, until my breathing slowed from hyperventilation to something approaching normal. Then he signed, "I'll take care of it. You'll get back to Oakhaven safely. I promise." Promises from strangers meant nothing. I'd learned that the hard way over and over in the years since my mother died and left me alone at 17 with no family and no money and no way to navigate a world that didn't speak my language. Promises were just words, and words disappeared the moment people walked away. But something about the way he looked at me, the absolute certainty in his iron-gray eyes, the steady pressure of his fingers around my wrist, made me want to believe him anyway. The train began to slow. Through the window, I could see massive buildings looming in the distance, concrete structures surrounded by walls and guard towers and coils of barbed wire that glinted in the weak morning sun. The Garrison. A military base. The kind of place civilians weren't supposed to see, let alone enter. Soldiers around us began to stir, gathering their belongings, preparing to disembark. I hadn't even noticed them until now, too focused on Silas, on the impossible fact of his attention, but the car was full of men and women in those same gray uniforms. Some were waking up. Others were already standing, their movements sharp and synchronized in a way that spoke of training drilled deep into muscle memory. Silas stood smoothly, his hand never leaving my wrist, and pulled me up beside him with effortless strength. I came up to his shoulder. He was tall, broad-shouldered, built like someone who spent his life in combat rather than behind a desk. Next to him, I looked exactly like what I was, small and fragile and completely out of my depth. He turned to me and signed, "Stay close. Don't wander. The base isn't safe for civilians, especially not alone. Do you understand?" I nodded, too overwhelmed to do anything else. He studied my face for another moment, then nodded back and released my wrist, only to take my hand instead. His fingers laced through mine, palm against palm, in a grip that was both possessive and protective. The touch sent electricity up my arm, made my pulse jump, made me far too aware of how warm his hand was and how much larger than mine and how completely it engulfed my fingers. I could smell him better now. That cedarwood and gunpowder scent, underlaid with something darker, something that made my omega instinct sit up and pay attention despite every rational warning in my head telling me to run. Alpha. Powerful alpha. The kind of alpha whose scent could trigger heats in unmated omegas if they weren't careful. I was very, very careful. We stepped off the train into chaos. I couldn't hear it, I never could, but I could feel it, the vibration of hundreds of boots hitting pavement, the press of bodies moving in organized formations, the waves of displaced air as vehicles drove past carrying supplies and equipment. The platform was crowded with soldiers in gray uniforms, all of them moving with purpose, none of them looking at us. Silas pulled me through it all with the ease of someone who commanded the chaos rather than being swept along by it. Soldiers moved out of his path without him having to ask, their eyes dropping respectfully as he passed, their postures straightening into attention. I saw them notice me, saw their nostrils flare as they caught my scent, Saw the questions flicker across their faces before they looked away. An Omega. A civilian. Being led through a military base by General Silas Vane, holding his hand like I belonged there. I focused on not tripping, on keeping up with his longer stride, on not looking at anyone except the broad back in front of me. We walked across the platform, through a security checkpoint where guards saluted Silas and waved us through without question, into a building that was all concrete and fluorescent lights, and the smell of coffee so strong I could almost taste it. Through corridors that all looked the same, gray walls, gray floors, doors marked with warnings I couldn't read. Finally, Silas stopped in front of a door with his name on it, General Vane, Northern Garrison Command, and pulled me inside. His office was sparse in a way that surprised me. A desk, 2 chairs, a window that looked out onto the training grounds. Nothing personal except a single photograph on the desk, a young boy with dark hair and laughing eyes, held in the arms of a younger version of Silas who was smiling with an openness the current version had locked away behind walls of duty and command. Silas gestured for me to sit, then moved around the desk and picked up a phone. He spoke into it. I couldn't hear the words, couldn't read his lips from this angle, but I could see his expression shift through various degrees of authority and command. He was arranging something. Transportation, maybe, or permission for me to be here. I sat in the chair and tried to make myself small. Invisible. The way I'd learned to do whenever the world felt too big and too loud in ways I couldn't hear but could sense. Through changes in air pressure, through the way people's faces shifted when they looked at me, through vibrations that traveled up through my feet. The door opened. A woman walked in, older, with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, wearing a white coat over her uniform. She looked at me, then at Silas, and her eyebrows rose slightly. Then she lifted her hands and signed. You must be the train passenger. I'm Dr. Lena Hartwell, Chief Medical Officer. Silas called me. I stared at her. Another person. Another hearing person who knew sign language. On a military base in the middle of nowhere. How I started to sign, then stopped because I didn't even know what question to ask first. Dr. Hartwell smiled, and there was warmth in it, genuine warmth, not the pitying condescension I was used to from medical professionals. Silas isn't the only one who learned, she signed. When he came to the Garrison, he made it a priority. About a third of the staff here know basic signs. More than a few are fluent. I turned to look at Silas, who had hung up the phone and was watching me with that same intense focus. You taught your staff sign language? I signed. His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, something that looked almost like vulnerability. My brother was deaf, he signed. He died when he was 9. I learned for him. And when I came here, I decided that no one under my command would be unable to communicate with someone just because they couldn't hear. The words hit me somewhere deep in my chest, in that place where I'd locked away all the years of isolation and frustration, and being treated like my disability was an inconvenience to be managed rather than a fact of my existence to be accommodated. What's your name, sweetheart? Dr. Hartwell signed. Leo? Leo Brennan. Well, Leo Brennan, it sounds like you've had a very long and unexpected morning. Why don't I get you some breakfast while Silas figures out how to get you home? I wanted to refuse. Wanted to say I wasn't hungry, that I just wanted to leave, that I didn't need their charity or their kindness or their fluent sign language that made my heart ache with longing for something I'd never had. But my stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, or at least audibly enough that I could feel the vibration of it, and Dr. Hartwell's smile widened. I'll take that as a yes. The cafeteria was overwhelming. Massive, filled with long tables and harsh lighting, and the organized chaos of a military base at morning meal. Soldiers sat in clusters, eating quickly and efficiently, barely pausing to taste their food. Every surface was metal or plastic, designed for function rather than comfort. I felt completely out of place in my second-hand jacket and faded jeans, my canvas messenger bag with a bookstore logo on it that suddenly seemed childish and naive. But Dr. Hartwell led me through the food line without making me feel like I didn't belong, loading a tray with eggs and toast and fruit and tea. She'd ask what I wanted, sign each option clearly, waited patiently while I processed. We found a table in the corner, away from the main flow of traffic, and she sat across from me. "Eat," she sighed. "You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." She wasn't wrong. Money had been tight this month, tighter than usual, and I'd been stretching my groceries further than they were meant to go. I picked up my fork mechanically, my hand still shaking slightly. The food tasted like nothing, my anxiety stealing flavor from everything, but I forced myself to eat. I didn't know when I'd get another chance. Silas appeared a few minutes later, carrying his own tray. He sat beside me, not across from me, beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off his body and smell that cedarwood gunpowder scent again. This close, it was harder to ignore. Harder to pretend it didn't affect me. Because it did affect me. I could feel it, a low hum of awareness in the back of my mind, a warmth spreading through my chest, a subtle shift in my hormones that I recognized with dawning horror. My heat wasn't due for another 2 weeks. I was careful about my suppressants, religious about taking them on schedule, because heats were dangerous for an omega alone and unprotected. But strong alpha pheromones could trigger early heats, could override suppressants, could make the body do things it wasn't supposed to do. I shifted away from Silas slightly, trying to put more distance between us. He noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything. "Are you all right?" He signed, setting down his fork. "Fine," I signed back too quickly. "Just tired." His eyes narrowed slightly, and I saw his nostrils flare, just a fraction, just enough to tell me he was scenting the air. "Scenting me." "Your scent changed," he signed, and there was something careful in his movements now, something deliberate. "You're not just tired." Heat flooded my face. I could feel the blush spreading down my neck, could see in his eyes that he noticed that too. "I'm fine," I signed again, more firmly. "My heat isn't due for 2 weeks. It's nothing." The words came out sharper than I intended, defensive and scared. Because if my heat was starting early here on a military base full of alphas, with no suppressants and no supplies and no way to get home, I was in serious trouble. Silas studied me for a long moment. Then he turned to Dr. Hartwell and signed something too quickly for me to follow. Dr. Hartwell's expression shifted, professional, concerned, and she nodded, standing up. "Come with me, Leo," she signed. "Let's go to the medical wing, just to check everything is okay." I wanted to refuse. Wanted to insist I was fine, that I just needed to go home, that I didn't need their help. But my body was already betraying me. I could feel the warmth spreading lower now, settling in my belly, a familiar ache that I knew too well. My heat was starting. Early. Right now. In a military base full of strange alphas. With an alpha warlord sitting beside me, whose scent was making everything worse. The medical wing was quieter than the cafeteria. Smaller rooms, softer lighting, the smell of antiseptic and clean linen. Dr. Hartwell led me to an examination room and signed for me to sit on the bed. She took my temperature, checked my pulse, did all the things doctors did while Silas waited outside. I'd seen him hesitate at the door, seen him sign, "I'll be right here," before closing it behind him. "Your temperature is elevated," Dr. Hartwell signed when she finished. "And your hormone levels are shifting. Your heat is starting, Leo. Probably triggered by the stress of today," and she paused, choosing her words carefully, "the proximity to an unfamiliar alpha." I know, I signed, my hand shaking. "I'm on suppressants. This shouldn't be happening." Suppressants aren't foolproof. Stress, exhaustion, strong alpha pheromones, they can override the medication. "How long have you been on them?" 3 years. Since I presented." She nodded slowly. "And when was your last full heat?" I hesitated. I haven't. I stopped, started again. I've been on suppressants continuously since I was 19. I've never had a full heat." Dr. Hartwell's expression shifted, concern, layered over something else. Something that looked almost like sympathy. "Leo, that's not safe. Suppressants are meant to be cycled." Your body needs to experience natural heats, or you can do long-term damage to your reproductive system. Did no one explain this to you? I shook my head, tears pricking in my eyes. No one had explained anything to me. After my mother died, there was no one to take me to doctors, no one to make sure I was taking care of myself properly. I figured out suppressants on my own, researched them online, ordered them through a mail-order pharmacy, took them every day without missing a dose because the alternative was too dangerous to contemplate. An omega in heat, alone and unprotected, in a world that saw omegas as property to be claimed, I'd rather have died. Okay, Dr. Hartwell sighed gently. Okay, here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay here for the next few days in the medical wing where we can monitor you and keep you safe. Your heat will run its course, probably about 3 to 4 days. And then we'll talk about a safer suppressant schedule, one that won't destroy your body. I signed, panic rising. I can't afford to miss work for 4 days. I'll lose my job. I'll lose my apartment. I can't. Silas already called your employer. I stared at her. What? While you were eating breakfast. He called the bookstore, explained the situation, not the heat, obviously, just that there was a transportation issue, and you'd been delayed. Your boss said to take whatever time you needed. Marcus. Kind patient Marcus, who'd hired me when no one else would, who'd learned basic signs so we could communicate, who was probably worried sick about me. But even his kindness had limits. 4 days was a long time. 4 days was pushing it. I'll talk to him myself, I signed. When I can. Thank you for helping me. I don't know why you're doing this. Dr. Hartwell's expression softened. Because you needed help, and we could give it. That's all there is to it. It wasn't, though. I could feel it, the weight of something unsaid, something hanging in the air between us. But I was too tired and too scared to push. The first day of my heat was the worst. The medical wing had a private room for omegas, soundproof, sync-controlled, with a bed that was soft and warm and absolutely not my own. Dear. Hartwell gave me suppressant adjuvants to take the edge off, medication to lower my fever, instructions to rest and drink water, and not worry about anything else. But I did worry. I worried about work, about money, about how I was going to get home, about why Silas Vane had decided to help me and what he wanted in return. Most of all, I worried about him. Because even through the sync control systems, even through the closed door and the concrete walls, I could smell him. Cedarwood and gunpowder, underlaid with something dark and warm that made my omega instincts purr with approval. He was nearby, checking on me, making sure I was okay. I knew because Dr. Hartwell told me. Silas asked about you. Silas wanted to know if you needed anything. Silas said to tell you that he'll drive you home himself when this is over, so you don't have to take the train. I didn't know what to do with that information. Didn't know what to do with the way my heart raced every time I heard his name, or the way my body responded to his scent even through all the barriers between us. On the second day, something shifted. My fever broke in the early morning, leaving me sweaty and exhausted and desperately thirsty. I stumbled out of bed, wrapped a blanket around myself, and made my way to the small bathroom attached to the room. When I came back, Silas was sitting in the chair by my bed. I froze. He looked up at me, and his iron gray eyes widened slightly, just for a moment, before his expression smoothed back into that calm, controlled mask. You should be resting, he signed. You should be. I started to sign back, then stopped because I didn't know what he should be doing. Not here. Not sitting in my hospital room while I was wrapped in a blanket with my hair a mess and my scent probably broadcasting every vulnerable omega emotion I'd ever had. He stood up slowly, carefully, like he was approaching a wounded animal. I wanted to make sure you were okay. Dr. Hartwell said your fever broke. It did. I'm fine. You don't need to be here. The words came out sharper than I intended, but I couldn't help it. His presence was overwhelming, his scent filling the room despite the filtration systems, his body taking up too much space, his eyes seeing too much. I know I don't need to be here, he signed. I want to be here. Why? The question hung between us, raw and vulnerable and desperate. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he stepped closer, just one step, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off his body, close enough that I could see the tiny scar above his left eyebrow and the exact shade of gray in his eyes. Because you fell asleep on my shoulder, he signed slowly, each movement deliberate. And when you woke up, you looked at me like you were waiting for me to hurt you. Like you expected cruelty. Like kindness was something that happened to other people. I flinched because he wasn't wrong. I've spent a long time watching people who are afraid, he continued. Soldiers, mostly. Civilians in war zones. People who've learned that the world is dangerous and that no one is coming to save them. You have that look, Leo. That exhausted, expectant dread. And I couldn't walk away from it. You don't know me, I signed my hand shaking. You don't know anything about me. I know you work in a bookstore. I know you've been taking suppressants continuously for 3 years because no one taught you any better. I know you live alone and pay your own bills and have been taking care of yourself since you were 17. I know you flinch when alphas get too close, but you haven't flinched away from me. Not once. I hadn't. I realized it suddenly, with a jolt of something that felt like fear and relief all at once. I hadn't flinched away from him. Not on the train, when I woke up with my cheek on his shoulder. Not when he took my hand and led me through the base. Not when he sat beside me in the cafeteria, close enough that I could smell his scent and feel the heat of his body. Not even now, with him standing so close I could count his eyelashes. Why? I signed, the question barely formed, my hands clumsy with exhaustion and emotion. Why haven't I flinched? I don't know, he signed back. But I'd like to find out. He stayed. Not in my room, Dr. Hartwell would have had his head, but nearby. I could smell him through the walls, could feel his presence like a warm weight at the edge of my awareness. On the third day, my heat ended. It ended the way heats always ended, with a crash of exhaustion and relief, with a fever breaking for good, with my body finally settling back into something that felt like normal. Dr. Hartwell came in to check on me, declared me healthy and stable, and handed me a stack of papers about suppressant cycling and omega health that made my head spin. Read them when you're feeling better, she signed. And Leo, you're always welcome here. For anything. Not just emergencies. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. An hour later, there was a knock on my door. Silas stood in the hallway, dressed in civilian clothes for the first time. Dark jeans, a black sweater, no medals or insignia or any of the trappings of his rank. He looked younger like this. More human. I have a car outside, he signed. If you're ready to go home. I was ready. Desperately, achingly ready. But I was also scared. Because going home meant leaving this place. Meant leaving the warmth and safety of the medical wing, the kindness of Dr. Hartwell, the impossible reality of an alpha warlord who signed my language and asked if I was hungry and looked at me like I mattered. Going home meant going back to my lonely apartment and my uncertain job and my life of just barely surviving. Going home meant losing him. Leo? He signed, concern flickering across his face. Are you all right? I'm fine, I signed back. I hesitated, then signed the truth before I could stop myself. I don't want to go back to being alone. Silas's expression shifted. Something flickered in his iron gray eyes, something hot and fierce and carefully controlled. You don't have to be, he signed. Not anymore. Not if you don't want to. What does that mean? He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his scent again, cedarwood and gunpowder, and that darker something underneath. Close enough that I could feel the heat of his body, see the pulse beating in his throat. It means I'm asking you to stay, he signed. Not here, not in the medical wing, but at the Garrison. With me. I have a job, an apartment, a life in Oak Haven. You have a job that barely pays your bills, an apartment that's falling apart, and a life that's been about survival for so long you've forgotten what it feels like to live. His signs were sharp, urgent, but his eyes were soft. I'm not trying to hurt you, Leo. I'm trying to offer you something better. Why? I signed the same question I've been asking since the moment I woke up on his shoulder. Why do you care? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he lifted his hands and signed words that changed everything. Because I think you're my mate. The world stopped. I stared at him, my mind blank, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. That's impossible. We just met. You can't know that. I can, he signed. I've known since you woke up on the train. Your scent, Leo, it's been driving me crazy for 3 days. Not in a bad way. He paused, searching for the right signs. In a way that feels like coming home. Like finding something I didn't know I was looking for. That's pheromones. Biology. It doesn't mean. It means something to me. His hands dropped to his sides, and he stood there, this powerful alpha warlord, this man who commanded armies and shaped the course of wars, looking at me like I held his entire future in my hands. I'm not asking you to decide anything right now, he signed after a moment. I'm just asking you to stay. To give this a chance. To let me show you that it could be different. Better. And if I say no, then I'll drive you home. Right now. And I'll never contact you again unless you ask me to. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes flickered. Pain, maybe, or resignation. I'm not going to trap you here, Leo. That's not who I am. I believed him. That was the terrifying part. I believed him. I stayed. Not because I was sure. I wasn't sure of anything except that I was tired of being alone. Tired of surviving instead of living. Tired of pretending I didn't want someone to see me, really see me, and choose me anyway. Silas drove me to the Garrison civilian housing complex, a cluster of small apartments behind the main buildings, clean and safe and nothing like my crumbling place in Oak Haven. This would be yours, he signed, showing me a one-bedroom unit with a kitchenette and a bathroom and a window that looked out onto the training grounds. Furnished. Utilities included. Meals at the cafeteria. Safe and secure. And what would I do here? I signed. I can't just live here. I need to work. Dr. Hartwell needs an assistant. Someone to help with paperwork and scheduling and the day-to-day tasks that take her away from patient care. The position comes with housing and benefits and a salary that's probably double what the bookstore pays you. I stared at him. You planned this. I planned for the possibility, he corrected. I didn't want to offer you something I couldn't deliver. And what do you get out of it? He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his scent, feel the heat of his body, see the way his pupils dilated when he looked at me. I get to see you every day, he signed. I get to know you. I get to prove that I meant what I said, that I think you're my mate, and that I'm willing to wait as long as it takes for you to figure out if you feel the same. And if I never feel the same, then you'll still have a job and a home and people who care about you. His signs were steady, certain. This isn't conditional, Leo. I'm not helping you because I expect something in return. I'm helping you because I can, and because you deserve better than what you've had. The words hit me somewhere deep, in that locked place where I'd hidden all the years of being treated like an inconvenience, a burden, a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. I started crying. Not the quiet, controlled tears I'd learned to shed in private, but full-body sobs that shook my entire frame and made my hands useless for signing. I covered my face with my hands, trying to pull myself together, trying to stop the humiliating display of emotion. But Silas didn't let me hide. He pulled my hand away from my face, gently, so gently, and wrapped his arms around me instead, pulled me against his chest and held me there, one hand cradling the back of my head, the other splayed across my lower back. I could feel his heartbeat against my cheek, strong and steady and real. And I could smell his scent surrounding me, filling my lungs, making me feel safe for the first time and longer than I could remember. I cried until I couldn't cry anymore. And when I finally pulled back, embarrassed and exhausted and raw in a way I hadn't been in years, Silas lifted his hands and signed 4 words that made my heart stutter in my chest. About you, Leo. The next few weeks were strange. Not bad at all, but strange. Because I wasn't used to being taken care of. Wasn't used to people asking me what I needed and then actually providing it. Wasn't used to waking up in a safe place and going to sleep without fear and moving through my days without that constant undercurrent of anxiety. Dr. Hartwell was a patient teacher. She showed me how to organize the medical wing's filing system, how to schedule appointments, how to manage the inventory of supplies. The work was detail-oriented and kept my mind occupied, and she never made me feel stupid for asking questions or needing things repeated. The staff was kind, more than kind. Many of them knew sign language, thanks to Silas's initiative, and those who didn't were learning. I found myself having conversations for the first time in years, real conversations, not the stilted exchanges of written notes or the frustrating guesswork of lip reading. And Silas was everywhere. Not in an overwhelming way, he was careful about that. Careful to give me space, careful not to push. But he found reasons to visit the medical wing multiple times a day. Sometimes it was legitimate check-ins with DR. Hartwell, briefings about base health protocols, paperwork that needed signatures. Other times, it was transparently obvious that he just wanted to see me. He'd stand near my desk and sign casual questions. How was your morning? Did you eat breakfast? Did you sleep well? And I'd answer, feeling warmth spread through my chest at the simple fact of his attention. He started bringing me coffee in the mornings. Prepared exactly how I liked it, black with a splash of oat milk, even though I'd never told him my preferences. He just observed and remembered. When I mentioned missing the bookstore, missing being around books, he arranged for me to use the Garrison small library whenever I wanted. And when he found me there one evening, curled up in an armchair with a novel, he sat across from me and read his own book in silence for 2 hours, just to be near me. On my days off, he'd appear at my door with plans, a walk through the Garrison gardens where late autumn flowers still bloomed in protected beds, a chess lesson where I learned he let me win the first 3 games before showing me how he'd been holding back, quiet evenings in his quarters, where he read poetry aloud in sign language, his hands moving with a grace that made even war poems feel beautiful. He never pushed for more than I was willing to give, but he also never hid what he wanted. I'm courting you, he signed one evening after a dinner we'd shared in his quarters. I want you to know that. I want you to know my intentions are serious. Courting, I signed back, the word feeling strange on my hands. That's an old-fashioned term. Maybe. But it's accurate. I'm not interested in casual, Leo. I'm not interested in temporary. I'm interested in you, all of you, for as long as you'll let me have you. And if I'm not ready, then I'll wait. What if I'm never ready? His expression softened, that iron-gray gaze warming into something that made my chest ache. Then I'll still be here. Still your friend. Still someone who cares about you. Because this, he gestured between us, this isn't conditional. I told you that. I believed him. That was still the most terrifying part. I believed him. A month passed. Then, 2. I settled into the rhythm of Garrison life. Work during the day, quiet evenings in my apartment, increasingly frequent dinners with Silas that started in the cafeteria and gradually moved to his quarters or mine. More private. More intimate. I learned things about him. That he took his coffee black. That he'd been in the military since he was 18. That he read poetry when he couldn't sleep. Old stuff, mostly Wordsworth and Keats, and a dog-eared copy of Rumi that looked like he carried it through 6 deployments. He learned things about me. That I loved baking, even though I wasn't very good at it. That I'd wanted to study art before my mother died. That I was terrified of thunderstorms because I couldn't hear them coming, and the first sign I had was the flash of lightning, which was usually too late to find somewhere safe. We learned each other slowly, carefully, building something solid and real. And then, one night, everything shifted. It started with a storm. I was working late in the medical wing, catching up on paperwork that had piled up during a busy week. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. Emergency generators kicked in, bathing everything in dim red light, but the sudden change startled me badly. I couldn't hear alarms or instructions or anything that would tell me if this was routine maintenance or an emergency. My heart hammered in my chest, and I stood frozen at my desk, hands shaking, trying to decide what to do. Then the door opened. Silas stood in the doorway, uniform crisp, face serious but calm. He crossed to me quickly and signed, "Are you all right?" I nodded, not trusting my hands to sign coherently. He studied my face carefully, then signed, "Come with me. My quarters have backup power. You'll be safer there." I followed him through corridors lit only by emergency lights, past soldiers moving with purpose toward various stations, upstairs and down hallways until we reached a door marked with his name and rank. He unlocked it and ushered me inside. I'd been here before, half a dozen times, for dinners and chess games and evenings spent reading in companionable silence. But it felt different tonight. Charged. The air between us heavy with something I couldn't name. "Sit," he signed, pointing to the couch. "I'll make tea." He moved around the small kitchen with efficient grace while I sat and tried to calm my racing heart. The panic was fading now that I was somewhere safe with someone I trusted, replaced by a different kind of nervous energy. I was alone with Silas, in his private quarters, late at night. And despite the innocent reason for being here, the intimacy of the situation wasn't lost on me. He returned with 2 mugs of tea, set them on the coffee table, and sat beside me. Not too close, leaving respectful distance, but close enough that I could smell his scent. Cedarwood and gunpowder. The scent I'd come to associate with safety. We sat in silence for a moment, sipping tea. The quiet was comfortable in a way I'd rarely experienced with another person. Most hearing people filled silence with meaningless chatter, forgetting or not caring that I couldn't hear it anyway. But Silas understood that silence could be communion rather than emptiness. That sometimes presence mattered more than words. The power flickered back on, lights brightening, systems humming, and Silas glanced at his phone. They fixed it faster than expected. "You can go back to your apartment if you want." Or he hesitated. "You can stay. For a while. If you want." "I'll stay," I signed, surprising myself with how quickly the words came. He nodded, something soft flickering across his face. I found myself studying him in the lamplight. The strong line of his jaw. The way his dark hair fell across his forehead when he wasn't in formal situations. The careful control in every movement, like he was constantly aware of his own strength and determined not to hurt anyone accidentally. He was beautiful, in a way that went beyond physical features, beautiful in his consideration, his patience, the care he took with fragile things. "Leo," he signed, setting down his mug. "Can I ask you something?" I nodded. "When you think about the future, your future, what do you see?" The question caught me off guard. I'd spent so long just trying to survive that I hadn't let myself imagine anything beyond the next rent payment, the next meal, the next day of work. "I don't know," I signed honestly. "Safety, I guess. Stability. A place where I don't have to be afraid all the time. And people. Do you see people in your future?" I hesitated. "I don't know. I've never let myself want that. Wanting things is dangerous when you can't afford to lose them. What if you didn't have to lose them? What if you could have something that lasted?" My hands trembled as I signed. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Silas shifted closer, close enough that our knees were almost touching, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off his body. "I'm asking if you've figured it out yet," he signed. "If you've realized what I've known since the moment you woke up on my shoulder." "And what's that?" "That you're mine, Leo. That you've been mine since the train. That every day I've spent getting to know you has only confirmed what my instincts knew from the start." His hands were steady, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the vulnerability in his eyes. "I'm not asking you to decide tonight. I'm not asking you to commit to anything you're not ready for. But I need you to know. I need you to understand that when I look at you, I see the rest of my life. Tears pricked at my eyes. I blinked them back, furious at myself for crying again. I cried more in the past 2 months than in the previous 5 years combined. I'm scared, I sighed. I know. What if I'm not enough? What if you wake up one day and realize I'm too much work? That my disability is too inconvenient? That I'm not worth the effort? Silas's jaw tightened. He reached out and took my hands in his, warm and calloused and completely steady. Listen to me, he signed, releasing one hand so he could gesture. You are not too much work. Your deafness is not an inconvenience, and you are worth more effort than I have ever given anything in my life. You don't know that. You can't know that. We've only known each other for 2 months. I've known you for 2 months, he signed back. And in those 2 months, I've watched you work yourself to exhaustion because you're afraid of being a burden. I've watched you apologize for needing help. I've watched you flinch away from kindness because you've been taught your whole life that you don't deserve it. His hands were moving faster now, urgent and passionate. You deserve it, Leo. You deserve kindness and safety and someone who sees you, all of you, and chooses you anyway. And I'm choosing you. I've been choosing you since the moment you fell asleep on my shoulder. I'll keep choosing you for as long as you'll let me. The tears spilled over. I couldn't stop them. I'm choosing you too, I signed, the words clumsy because my hands were shaking so badly. I'm so scared, but I'm choosing you too. He kissed me. Not carefully or tentatively, but thoroughly. Like he'd been waiting for permission, and now that he had it, he wasn't going to waste a single second. His lips were soft against mine, but there was nothing soft about the way he kissed me. It was claiming and desperate, and full of 2 months of restrained, wanting finally allowed to break free. One hand cupped the back of my head, fingers threading through my hair. The other pressed against my lower back, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. I could feel his heartbeat fast and strong against my chest. Could smell his scent, stronger now, flooding my senses and making my head spin. He tasted like tea and something darker, something that was just him, just Silas, just the man who'd been patient and kind and steady for 2 months while I figured out what I wanted. I kissed him back with everything I had, poured years of loneliness and fear and desperate hope into the contact. Tried to tell him with my mouth what my hands couldn't sign, that I wanted this, wanted him, wanted to believe in the future he kept promising. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. I love you, he signed with hands that trembled. I need you to know that, before we go any further. I love you, Leo. Not because you're convenient or temporary or easy. Because you're you. Because you're the bravest person I've ever met. Because you make me want to be better than I am. The confession should have scared me. Instead, it felt like coming home after years of being lost. I love you too, I signed back, tears streaming down my face. I think I've loved you since you signed me on the train and looked at me like I mattered. He kissed me again, deeper this time, pulling me closer until I was practically in his lap. I let myself fall into it completely. Let myself believe that maybe I'd finally found someone who wouldn't leave when I became inconvenient, who wouldn't tire of accommodating my disability, who saw me as worth the effort. His scent surrounded me, cedarwood and gunpowder, yes, but something else now too. Something warm and rich and intoxicating. His alpha pheromones, I realized. Released deliberately, probably, because he was trying to tell me something his hands couldn't. And my body responded. I felt it, a warmth spreading through my chest, down my spine, settling low in my belly. My omega instincts waking up, stretching, recognizing something they'd been waiting for. Silas, a sign, breaking the kiss. I can feel my heat. I know, he signed back, his eyes dark with want but his hands steady. I can smell it. You're not due for another few weeks, but my pheromones are triggering it. I'm sorry. I should have been more careful. Don't apologize. Leo, I want this. I want you. I've been waiting for you my whole life, even if I didn't know it. His expression shifted, something fierce and possessive flickering across his face before he controlled it. If we do this, if I claim you, there's no going back. You understand that, right? A mating bond is permanent. It changes things, changes us. I understand. You'll be able to feel me. All the time. My emotions, my location, my everything. And I'll feel you. There's no privacy in a mating bond, Leo. No secrets. I don't want secrets from you. I don't want privacy. I want you. He stared at me for a long moment, iron gray eyes searching mine for any sign of doubt, any hint of hesitation. He didn't find any. Then yes, he signed. Yes, Leo. I'll claim you. I'll mate you. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to face the world alone again. The claiming was everything. I'd heard stories about mating bonds, how they felt, how they changed you, how they connected two people in ways that went beyond the physical. But stories couldn't prepare me for the reality of it. When Silas bit down on the spot where my neck met my shoulder, gently at first, then harder, breaking the skin just enough to draw blood, I felt something crack open inside me. A door I hadn't known existed, swinging wide to let light pour in. And through that door came Silas. His emotions flooded into me, love, fierce and overwhelming, protectiveness, sharp and immediate, want, deep and endless. I felt his joy and his fear and his hope, all tangled together, all centered on me. Leo, I felt him think, not in words but in feelings and certainty. Mine. Finally mine. And through the bond, I sent back everything I couldn't say. Every year of loneliness. Every moment of fear. Every desperate hope I've been too afraid to name. Yours I sent back. Always yours. The rest of the night was a blur of heat and want and connection. We moved from the couch to his bed, and he was careful, so careful, even though his alpha instincts must have been screaming at him to take, to claim, to possess. He checked in constantly, his hands never stopping their questions. Okay? Too much? Do you need me to slow down? And I answered with my body and through the bond, letting him feel my pleasure and my trust and my overwhelming love. When it was over, when we were both exhausted and tangled together in sheets that smelled like both of us, he pulled me against his chest and held me there. I could feel his heartbeat against my cheek. Strong and steady and real. You're really here, he signed with one hand, the other still wrapped around me. You're really mine. I'm really here, I signed back. And I'm really yours. He kissed my forehead, soft and tender, and I felt his contentment through the bond, warm and steady like a heartbeat I could finally hear. For the first time in my life, I wasn't alone. For the first time in my life, I was home. The weeks that followed were the happiest of my life. Not because everything was perfect. It wasn't. I still had bad days, days when the world felt too big and too loud in ways I couldn't hear but could feel. Days when the old fears crept back in, whispering that this couldn't last, that I didn't deserve this, that Silas would eventually realize I was too much trouble. But whenever those days came, Silas was there. Through the bond, I could feel him, his steady presence at the edge of my awareness, warm and constant. And when the fear got too bad, when I started spiraling, he'd appear at my side and pull me into his arms and sign, I got you. I've always got you. And I believed him, because I could feel it. Through the bond, I could feel his love, not just the words, but the reality of it. Steady and patient and utterly without condition. A month after the claiming, he asked me to move into his quarters permanently. This apartment is too big for one person, he signed, standing in the middle of my living room while I packed boxes. And I'm tired of waking up without you. You wake up without me every morning when you go to PT. I signed back, smiling. That's different. That's work. I'm talking about the nights. The mornings before work. The moments in between. He stepped closer, taking my hands in his. I want to fall asleep with you every night and wake up with you every morning. I want your toothbrush next to mine and your books on my shelves and your scent on my pillows. I want to build a life with you, Leo. For real. I already have a life with you. Then let's make it official. I moved in the next day. 3 months later, he asked me to marry him. It wasn't elaborate, no grand gestures, no crowds, no spectacle. Just the two of us in the Garrison gardens, under the pale light of an early spring evening. He went down on one knee, in front of the flower bed, where we'd had our first real conversation outside of work. His hands were trembling. I could see it, could feel his nervousness through the bond, but his signs were steady. Leo Brennan, you fell asleep on my shoulder on a train, and you woke up everything I've been waiting for. You taught me that silence isn't absence. That disability isn't weakness. That love doesn't need perfect hearing to be perfectly heard. Tears were streaming down my face. I couldn't see clearly, couldn't sign back, but I didn't need to. He could feel my answer through the bond, the overwhelming yes that filled every corner of my being. Will you marry me? He signed. Will you let me spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to face the world alone again? I pulled him to his feet and kissed him instead of signing, because my hands were shaking too badly to form words. But he felt it anyway. Yes, through the bond. Yes, yes, yes. The wedding was small, just the Garrison staff and a few of Silas's military colleagues, Dr. Hartwell officiating, because she was the closest thing either of us had a family. I wore a simple gray suit that matched Silas's uniform. He wore his dress blues, metals glinting in the afternoon sun, and when he looked at me, his eyes were the color of spring storms, gray and alive and full of love. Dr. Hartwell signed the ceremony as she spoke, so I could follow along without needing an interpreter. Do you, Silas, take Leo to be your lawfully wedded mate? To honor and cherish, in silence and in sound, in peace and in war, for as long as you both shall live? I do, he signed, his hand sure. And do you, Leo, take Silas to be your lawfully wedded mate? To honor and trust, in fear and in courage, in solitude and in company, for as long as you both shall live? I do, I signed back, my hand shaking, but my heart steady. Then by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you mated for life. You may kiss. Silas cupped my face in his hands, warm and calloused and completely steady, and kissed me like we were the only two people in the world. And through the bond, I felt his joy like sunlight on my skin. Mine he sent. Finally and forever mine. Yours I sent back. Always yours. The train carried me past my stop that day. But it carried me exactly where I was meant to be. I think about that sometimes, about how a delay, an exhaustion, and one stupid mistake change everything. About how I fell asleep on the shoulder of a stranger and woke up in the arms of the man who would teach me that I deserved more than survival. My deafness isn't a flaw to be overlooked. It's part of me, part of who I am and who I'll always be. And Silas has never treated it like anything other than what it is, a fact of my existence, not a tragedy to be mourned. He learned my language before he ever met me. He taught it to his staff. He looks at me like I matter, like I'm worth the effort, because to him I am. To him, I always have been. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of our quarters, our home, kneading dough for bread I'd bring to the cafeteria tomorrow morning. Silas was at the table, reading reports, his brow furrowed in concentration. But when he sensed me watching, he looked up and smiled. What? He signed. Nothing, I signed back. Just looking at you. Why? Because I can. Because you're here. Because 3 years ago, I didn't think I deserved to have anyone look at me the way you're looking at me right now. He stood up and crossed the kitchen, wrapping his arms around me from behind. His chin rested on my shoulder, and I could feel his breath warm against my neck. You always deserved it, he signed with one hand, the other still holding me close. You just hadn't found the right person to give it to you yet. And you're the right person. I'm the person, he signed. The only person. The person who's going to spend the rest of his life making sure you never forget it. I leaned back against him, flour on my hands and love in my chest, and let myself be held. The train had carried me past my stop, but it had carried me exactly where I was meant to be. Then,